We all want a harmonious society where our children and families and friends and communities can all live together in peace and cooperation. Social harmony is needed to hold society together. Diversity is a challenge to social harmony and can cause social conflict. People are different, having different backgrounds, life experience, opinions, philosophies, political views, and religious beliefs. The increase in immigration is bringing more cultural diversity to our neighborhoods. This makes communication more difficult, leading to distrust and social separation. And the demands of the social justice movement has raised tensions between racial, ethnic, and gender groups. To maintain order, social control is necessary. Social control regulates behavior to conform to established norms. The more diverse a society is, the more social authority is needed to unify the people. Increasing demands for equality of outcome and the distribution of wealth can only be enforced by an authoritarian government. This raises the question, is a community of free individuals possible? How do you unify independent thinking individuals who will not commit to a system of social norms and will not submit to an authoritarian social order? In the previous video, Part 2, The Culture War of Human Nature, we place Rudolf Steiner's idea of the free spirit in a historical context to compare it with other ways to view human nature. How a society views human nature strongly influences social and political life. In this video, we will place Steiner's idea of unifying the people in a historical context to compare it with other ways used to unify the people. The life of the ancient pagan was fully immersed within nature, not above it or outside it. The common bond of unity for pagans was survival, by living in harmony with nature. For the pagan, truth was revealed in nature. Pagan culture was adapted to specific regions of nature. This prevented them from uniting with people who lived in different natural environments. Village life was simple and free. All men were equal. There was no oppression in pagan village society and no need to teach obedience. Their gods, myths, and morality varied widely from tribe to tribe. Pagans did not agree on how to understand human nature or the meaning and purpose of life. They lived in the moment and were unconcerned about the future. Traditions were handed down and humanity learned how to survive in the natural world, but there was no progress. Pagan tribes were diverse, with different beliefs and ways of life. Their diversity caused disagreement and conflict with other tribes. Tribal conflict limited the size of the pagan social system. Without a commitment to a system of beliefs and no authority structure, the pagan social system could not unify a larger society. In the pre-modern medieval age, the Catholic Church was the most powerful institution. The basis of truth was faith in revelation, scriptures, and the Church. The Church was able to unite the people by providing a common moral order. Religion unified the peasants in a collective sense of good and evil. The Pope was at the top of the hierarchical feudal social system, followed by the king, the land barons, the knights, and the peasants or serfs. The life of a peasant was very hard in the Middle Ages. Life was so hard that many pagans gave up their freedom for the security and protection provided by the king. The serf swore loyalty and allegiance to the king in return for a small plot of land for growing food. By joining the king's strict feudal system, the serfs placed themselves at the bottom of the social hierarchy with no chance of advancement. In the feudal system, the king owned everything. All the serfs' possessions, their food, homes, and animals, all belonged to the king. The serf did not have freedom of movement and could not marry without permission. Their job was to do whatever the baron of the land told them to do. What made it possible to unify a diversity of people into a larger society was the peasants' submission to a common moral order and their obedience to the feudal authoritarian structure. The problem was that social cohesion came at the expense of individual freedom. The Age of Enlightenment centered on reason as the primary source of authority. The methods of science was emphasized. The source of truth was reason and the evidence of observation. Nothing was to be accepted on faith. The scientific truths of the objective world became a unifying principle of consensus and cooperation for building a better society. It is the task of the scientists to reveal the harmony of laws ruling throughout existence. Isaac Newton was a key figure in the scientific revolution, discovering the laws of gravity, motion, and calculus. The new scientific approach promoted critical thinking. It was expected that any claim of truth would be backed up by reason and evidence. Critical analysis was applied to everything in society, from religious dogma to understanding the human being to political systems. The rational individual is capable of making their own life choices and demanded freedom. At the founding of America, the Bill of Rights was written to protect the rights of the individual. The Enlightenment emphasized developing the capacity to think universally. Observed events in the world are conceptualized into universal laws and principles to place them in context within a bigger picture. At the level of pure conceptual thinking, ideas can be organized to make more connections with the rest of our knowledge. This is pure reason. Pure reason leads to the objective discovery of knowledge, but it is also, paradoxically, a free creation of the human mind. For example, there outside stands a tree. I conceptualize it when the tree connects itself with a concept in my mind. The concept is indivisibly bound up with the tree. Once within me, the tree becomes more than it is outside. The tree is no longer isolated in external space. The concept of the tree combines with other ideas that exist in me. It becomes a part of the whole world of ideas. It embraces the vegetable kingdom and is further integrated into the evolutionary scale of every living thing. Pure reason comes up with new theories and creative insights to expand the fields of knowledge. Mathematics is an example of how it is possible to discover ultimate truths through the use of pure reason alone. Universal truths are discovered that all cultures will embrace. The Enlightenment inspired social unity by appealing to a universal liberal spirit that values individuality, liberty, equality, universal human rights, using reason to reconcile opposing views, and focusing on our shared humanity rather than our differences. A diversity of different kinds of people find a common unity at the level of the universal truths of science and the universal values of classical liberalism. Since the Enlightenment, science has been the authority of truth. In this spirit, Rudolf Steiner based his philosophy of freedom on reason and the evidence of observation. he made verifiable observations of human nature, and he called his freedom philosophy a science of freedom. Enlightenment humanism emphasized the reasoning individual who was free to pursue his own happiness. But if everyone is going in their own direction, how can we build community? Steiner described how it is possible to build a community of individuals through the experience of a harmony of intentions. But first of all, let's place the philosophy of freedom in a historical context. Steiner wrote the philosophy of freedom during the 1890s. This was a period when American pragmatic thinkers find modernist philosophy too abstract. Scientists and engineers were more interested in applying scientific theory to practical life. At the end of the century, applied science caused an exponential growth of technology. The pragmatists believe the purpose of knowledge is not just to come up with pure and beautiful truths, but rather knowledge should be functional. Steiner agreed with the pragmatist. He believed truth should be used to guide action. This is practical reason. Practical reason is the use of reason to decide how to act. Even though the philosophy of freedom is very abstract at times and can be difficult to understand, it is a practical book about how to think and act freely. Part 1 presents a theory of freedom through a study of the processes of cognition. Part 2 is about applying the theory of freedom to life as an ethical individualist. The philosophy of freedom is not just another Steiner spiritual book to be read and then put on a bookshelf to collect dust. It was meant to be applied to individual life, social life, and political life. Quote, "The purpose of the philosophy of freedom is to lay the foundation of ethical individualism and of a social and political life." Steiner valued the philosophy of freedom as his most important work, and he valued those of us who refuse to conform to stereotypes and superficial cultural trends. Quote, "I know how much a stereotypical attitude, lacking all individuality, is prevalent everywhere. Many flaunt a way of life that follows only the current cultural trends. But I also know that many of my contemporaries strive to conduct their lives in the direction of the principles I have suggested. To them I dedicate this book." Steiner dedicated the philosophy of freedom to those who apply the principles of ethical individualism to their life, and then go on to become freedom activists who stand up for the principles of freedom in social and political life. His most important gift, knowledge of freedom, makes it possible to actualize freedom in individual and social life. The ethical individualist, with practical reason as his guide, acts out of knowledge. Quote, "What does it mean to have knowledge of the motives of one's actions? Too little attention has been given to this question because we always split in two what is an inseparable whole, the human being. The doer is set apart from the knower, but the one that matters most is lost sight of, the knowing doer, the one who acts out of knowledge. Society has many knowers who know what to do, but do not act. Society has many doers who act, but do not know what they are doing. What is needed are knowing doers. The one-sided knower and the one-sided doer lack the empowerment of practical reason that leads to achievement." Quote, "When we act under the influence of pure intuitions, the driving force of our action is pure thinking. Since it is customary in philosophy to call pure thinking reason, we are justified in calling the moral driving force characteristic of this level practical reason. When pure thinking is used to make a decision about how to act, it becomes the driving force of practical reason. We are not talking about the kind of practical down-to-earth thinking that merely follows old habits and traditional opinions. Practical reason is creative, innovative, and empowering. It leads to intuitive insight that integrates our inner knower and outer doer into the empowered creative action of a leader. For a simple explanation of practical reason, see my video, How to Make Better Decisions. At the level of practical reason, what Steiner calls the impulse of freedom is experienced. I did a video about the impulse of freedom called Science Breakthrough Verifies Rudolf Steiner's Impulse of Freedom. Links are below in the description box. Now we arrive at the question we want to answer. If free spirits are following their own powerful impulses to act and going in their own direction, how can we build community? Is a free community of diverse individuals possible? Quote, if the source of social compatibility was not a basic part of human nature, no external laws could instill it into human nature. Only because individuals are of one mind can they live out their lives side by side. The free individual lives in full confidence that all other free human beings belong to a spiritual intellectual world with himself, and that their intentions will harmonize with his. The free individual does not demand agreement with his fellow human beings, but he expects it, because it is inherent in human nature. In his study of the human being, Steiner recognized that the source of social compatibility was to be found in human nature. There are certain characteristics of the mind that are shared by all humanity. One of these characteristics is that we are all part of one mind. We are not all one people. We are diverse, but on a deeper level, we are of one mind. This is what makes community possible. Otherwise, real community would not be possible. Many would agree that we are of one mind with members of our in-group. In fact, the group demands it. But no one really expects to find agreement with those of another religion or an opposing political party. Yet Steiner boldly declared that our intentions will harmonize and we should expect to find agreement with others. We are of one mind in that we belong to the same intellectual world that makes communication possible. On a deeper level, we are of one mind because we all grasp the same universal concepts. This makes it possible for pure thinkers like philosophers and mathematicians from around the world to clearly understand each other. Quote, there is only one single concept of triangle. It does not matter for the content of this concept whether it is grasped in A's consciousness or in B's. A common preconceived opinion that is difficult to overcome prevents one from recognizing that the concept of a triangle that my mind grasps is the same as the concept that my neighbor's mind grasps. The naive person believes himself to be the creator of his concepts. He consequently believes that everyone has their own concepts. The one single concept of triangle does not become many concepts of triangle because it is thought by many minds. Rather, the thought of many becomes a single whole. We each have different life experiences, but we are able to communicate and understand each other because we all think the same concepts. Another characteristic of the mind is that concepts combine with each other to form an organized whole. In the example given, all specific varieties of triangles are unified in the single concept triangle. All concepts I form of particular lions merge into the universal concept lion. The concept organism links up with other concepts such as development according to law and growth. The single concepts unite into a harmonious conceptual system in which each concept has its special place. This unity of the world of ideas is what makes a harmony of human intentions possible. Quote, "But how is a social life possible if each one is only striving to assert their own individuality?" This question is characteristic of misguided moralism. The moralist believes that a social community is possible only if all are united by a common moral order. This shows that the moralist does not understand the unity of the world of ideas. He fails to see that the world of ideas that inspires me is none other than the one inspiring my neighbor. What we have in common is that we are inspired by the same world of ideas. At the core of human intention is an ethical concept or ideal that inspires the action. It may be the pursuit of individual happiness, serving humanity, or it may be cultural progress. Although we may be inspired by different ideals, they are all drawn from the same unified world of ideas. This means each person's intentions are part of a harmonious unity that binds individuals together. But not all our conduct has this character. Quote, "I differ from my neighbor not because we are living in two entirely different mental worlds, but because he receives different intuitions than I do out of our common world of ideas. He wants to live out his intuitions, I mine. If our source truly is the world of ideas, and we do not obey any external impulses, physical or spiritual, then we can only meet in the same striving, in the same intentions. A moral misunderstanding, a clash of aims, is impossible between morally free people. To understand the intentions of an individual's act of will, it requires observing their deeds and asking them to share their views. If the source of action is drawn from the world of universal ideas, each one's intentions can find its special place of harmony within a community of individuals. A harmony of intentions is only possible for those who are morally free. Those who are obedient to the teachings of spiritual leaders or spiritual groups will always have clashes with others. Clashes will never end with those who conform to natural groupings of race, ethnicity, and sex, and do their duty to serve social and political groupings. This brings us to the group identity-based social justice movement. Social justice ideology is based on cultural determinism that divides us into groupings. Human nature is thought of as a blank slate that is socially constructed by a racial, ethnic, and gender group. Truth is also a social construct. There is no truth to be discovered. Each separate social group has its own cultural narrative to teach community values, reinforce social norms, and strengthen its identity. How we think and act is determined by our group. Social justice ideology further divides us up into privileged and oppressed groups. It views life as a conflict between the privileged and the oppressed. Today's social justice does not seek social harmony. It calls for revolution. It considers social compatibility an external problem that will only be resolved through gaining enough power to overthrow the privileged class. But how can the social justice movement unify so many diverse groups of people to fight a revolution? The unifying principle that each disadvantaged group has in common is oppression. To strengthen their coalition, they also call upon members of the privileged class who have empathy for the disadvantaged to join their fight for justice. The fuel for revolution is agitation and propaganda. The leaders of social justice agitate by inflaming feelings of resentment and victimhood. They ignore the importance of personal responsibility in a free society. The revolutionary propaganda is intersectionality theory, which is taught throughout our universities. The hotbed of intersectionality is social justice studies. Programs in ethics studies, women's studies, and gender studies train students to become social justice activists. These programs are also known as grievance studies. They help you to create an identity as an oppressed black or brown person, an oppressed woman, or one of many gender identities. What these programs will not do is help you identify as a unique individuality. Instead, you will learn how to conform to a group stereotype created by academics. This is not the inclusive social justice movement of Martin Luther King Jr., who sought universal human rights for everyone, regardless of skin color. Nor does intersectionality reach for universal ideals that make a harmony of intentions possible. Knowledge is attached to identity, so a black person will have authoritative knowledge on racism based on their experience as a black person. Personal experiences then generalize into false claims about society, while research data is ignored. Because a black person has an experience of racism does not mean racism is on the rise. Support for segregated schools has been a way to measure racism in society. This has dramatically decreased. The problem is that each person's personal experience will be different. This makes communication and agreement very difficult. The social justice identitarian will say, "I am black," which is different than saying, "I am a person who happens to be black." "I am black" expresses a racial identity that focuses on our differences, rather than the universal human essence that we all have in common. "I am a person who happens to be black" expresses the autonomous self that stands above culture and biology. For example, the call for black rights is divisive, while the call for human rights is inclusive. It is astonishing that Rudolf Steiner warned us about the limitations of social justice academic study over 100 years ago. Quote, "Whoever judges people according to their typical characteristics stops short at the boundary line beyond which people begin to be individuals, whose activity is based on free self-determination. What lies below this boundary line can naturally become the subject of academic study. The characteristics of race, ethnicity, nation, and sex are the subjects of specific branches of study. Only people who wish to live as nothing more than an example of a type could possibly fit the general picture that emerges from this kind of academic study. None of these branches of study are able to reach the unique character of the single individual. Determining the individual according to the laws of his type ends where the region of freedom in thinking and acting begins. A person has to deny themselves and try very hard to live the group identity described in these courses. It would be more beneficial to student development if they replace social justice courses with a free individuality studies program. Now we can begin to see how Rudolf Steiner wrote the philosophy of freedom over 100 years ago to prepare free spirits for the culture war that is being fought today. He warned us that the great battle of civilization will be fought in our time, right in this moment. He calls it the time of decision. Quote, "The time of decision is around the end of the 20th century, when we will either stand at the grave of civilization in a war of all against all, or turn toward a spiritualized culture." The social justice movement pits one identity group against another and one identitarian against another in a final struggle for power. The Hobbesian battleground of a war of all against all is based on Hobbes' view of human nature that saw man as a selfish natural being in a fight over scarce resources. The social justice movement views the human being as a natural being of race, ethnicity, and sex in a zero-sum struggle with the privileged over a limited number of opportunities and wealth. This is the Hobbesian nightmare. There is no place for rising above natural and cultural determinism to enter the one mind of universal ideals, where a harmony of intentions is attained. Jordan Peterson carries on the work of Rudolf Steiner by echoing the same warning today.
And so for the postmodernists, the world is a Hobbesian battleground of identity groups. They do not communicate with one another because they can't. All there is a struggle for power. And if you're in the predator group, which means you're an oppressor, then you better look out, because you're not exactly welcome. And neither are your ideas. So that's what you're up against.
The social justice movement is not about justice. It is a struggle for power. Rudolf Steiner and Jordan Peterson are right. Now is a time of decision that will determine the fate of civilization. What is at stake is the continued evolution of the free human being. I do not believe the social justice movement will win the culture war, because their ideas are in opposition to true human nature. All they can accomplish is to disrupt society for a long time, but they will never conquer the human spirit. In the end, I believe the free spirit will not allow itself to be denied.